Power has always been their currency, the game they play to keep others on their knees. They thrive on submission, on the sight of broken wills and lowered gazes. They expected the same from you, that you would crumble, plead for mercy, offer your pride as a sacrifice to their illusions of control. But the silence they craved from your lips never came. You didn't kneel. You didn't fold. They pushed. They twisted. They schemed. But you remained unyielding, and their disappointment was almost poetic. When you refuse to beg, you strip people of the illusion that they hold something you cannot live without. They dangled their power like bait, expecting you to leap for it, to grovel at their feet. But power given by others is an illusion, and you've never been one for mirages. You stood, not because the cost wasn't high, but because you knew the price of surrender was higher. To beg is to place your worth in someone else's hands. And that was never an option for you. Control is a fragile thing when it relies on someone else's submission. They demanded your compliance, but their demands fell into the void of your silence. Begging would have validated their power, reinforced the pedestal they so desperately clung to. By refusing, you didn't just protect your pride, you shattered theirs. For in that moment, they realized that their power was not real, that it had always depended on your belief in it. And without that belief, it crumbled like ash in the wind. They underestimated the strength it takes to stay silent in the face of pressure. Begging would have been easy, an escape from the tension, a way to placate their fragile egos. But silence is harder. It demands resolve, endurance, a refusal to play the game on their terms. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was defiance. A statement that their power meant nothing to you, that their games could not ensnare someone who refuses to play. Each second you held your ground was a victory, each breath a reminder that you answer to no one. The expectation of begging is a weapon they wield, sharp and cruel, meant to cut through pride and dignity. But when that weapon fails, it turns on them, slicing through their delusions of superiority. They were so certain that they could bring you to your knees, that your silence left them disarmed, their tactics rendered useless. Begging was their script, the ending they had written for you. By refusing, you rewrote the narrative, turned the ending into a beginning. Your beginning, not theirs. Refusing to beg is not just an act of defiance. It is a declaration of independence. Begging gives power to those who don't deserve it, reinforces a dynamic that serves only the oppressor. By standing firm, you reclaimed the narrative, pulled the rug out from under their feet. Their confusion, their anger, their desperation, it all stems from the same place. They had placed their worth in your submission, and when you withheld it, their house of cards began to collapse. People who expect begging thrive on control, but control is meaningless without an audience. Your refusal left them shouting into an empty void, their demands bouncing back like echoes off cold stone walls. You stood as the mirror they couldn't avoid, reflecting their own desperation back at them. Every attempt to make you bend only revealed their weakness, their inability to force you into compliance. They thought they could crush you, but they only crushed themselves. Begging is the language of the powerless, but silence speaks of a power far greater. To refuse to beg is to claim that power, to rise above the need for external validation. They saw your refusal as arrogance, but it was something far more dangerous: self-respect. Your silence was louder than any plea could have been, a roar that drowned out their taunts and demands. They tried to corner you, to force your hand, but you showed them that power doesn't come from others. It comes from within. Their need for you to beg was not about what you could give them, but about what they needed for themselves. Begging would have been their victory, their validation, their reassurance that they still mattered. By denying them that, you turned the tables, made them question their own worth. They pushed harder, demanded louder, but each effort only deepened their failure. In their attempts to break you, they broke themselves, their power exposed as nothing more than a desperate illusion. You stood unmoved, unbroken, untouched by their schemes. They thought you'd beg, thought you'd crumble, thought you'd hand over your pride to appease their need for control. But you didn't. And now, as they stand amidst the ruins of their failed manipulations, they are left with nothing but the memory of your silence and the shadow of your strength. Begging is surrender masked as strategy, a desperate attempt to regain what was never truly yours. It is the act of throwing yourself at the mercy of someone who relishes the imbalance it creates. In the moment, it feels like survival, a last-ditch effort to hold on to a crumbling connection. But beneath the surface, it is a surrender of dignity, a relinquishing of self-worth for the illusion of control. Begging doesn't mend relationships. It fractures the soul, leaving behind a shell that resembles neither strength nor freedom. At its core, begging is rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of standing alone. It whispers that by giving up your pride, you will somehow win back what you've lost. But fear is a liar, and begging is its voice. Begging places you in a position of submission, feeding the ego of those who thrive on your insecurity. It teaches them that your worth is negotiable, that you are willing to shrink yourself to fit their expectations. And once that lesson is learned, it is nearly impossible to unteach. Begging transforms relationships into power struggles. The beggar becomes the supplicant, and the other holds the reins. The dynamic shifts irreparably, turning what should have been a partnership into a hierarchy. Every act of begging reinforces this imbalance, digging the hole deeper, making escape seem impossible. It is not love that keeps you tethered in such moments. It is desperation, the mistaken belief that lowering yourself will somehow raise the relationship. But relationships built on the bones of begging are doomed to collapse under their own weight. The human mind, in its moments of vulnerability, seeks coping mechanisms to deal with pain. Begging feels like action, like doing something to fix what feels broken. But in reality, it is paralysis disguised as movement. It keeps you stuck, unable to move forward, chained to the hope that someone else will decide your worth. Begging removes your agency, making you a bystander in your own story. It is the opposite of power, the antithesis of growth. Those who demand begging do so because they feed on control. They are not interested in reconciliation or resolution. They are interested in dominance. Begging gives them that, handing over power on a silver platter. It confirms their superiority, reinforces their belief that you cannot survive without them. But survival is not found in submission. It is found in strength, in the decision to walk away from those who make you feel small. Begging is their weapon, but your refusal to wield it is your shield. Avoiding begging is not about pride. It is about self-preservation. To beg is to bleed for someone who watches without lifting a finger. It is to offer your vulnerabilities to those who will use them as ammunition. Walking away, refusing to plead, is not an act of arrogance, but an act of courage. It is the decision to value yourself above the opinions of others, to stand firm in the knowledge that your worth is not up for negotiation. Relationships that demand begging are not relationships. They are cages. Begging creates an illusion of closeness, but it is a closeness rooted in dependency, not connection. It fosters resentment, erodes trust, and leaves both parties trapped in a cycle of control and submission. Love does not require begging. Respect does not demand surrender. Any relationship that thrives on such dynamics is already poisoned. Its foundation built on manipulation rather than mutual understanding. To avoid begging is to reclaim your power. It is to stand in the face of rejection and say, I am enough, with or without you. It is to refuse to let someone else define your worth, to draw a line in the sand and dare them to cross it. Begging may feel like action, but it is inaction disguised. True action is walking away, rebuilding, finding strength in your solitude, rather than seeking validation in someone else's hands. Begging is a choice, one made in moments of vulnerability. But it is a choice that must be consciously avoided, no matter how tempting it feels. The moment you beg, you hand over control, give someone else the power to determine your happiness. Avoiding begging is not about denying your feelings. It is about channeling them into something constructive, something that builds you rather than breaks you. It is about recognizing that your value is inherent, untouchable, not something that can be granted or revoked by another. Good people know about both good and evil. Bad people do not know about either. And begging fuels their already out-of-control ego. To know evil and reject it is the hallmark of strength. Those who carry goodness within them are not naive. They are not blind to the darkness. They recognize it, confront it, and choose to rise above it. Bad people, on the other hand, are oblivious to this duality. They neither comprehend the depths of malice nor the heights of virtue. They simply act, driven by impulses they cannot control and egos they cannot satiate. Begging is their favorite fuel, a spark that feeds the inferno of their vanity, convincing them of a power they do not deserve. When you beg before those who are inherently bad, you hand them a trophy. In their minds, your act of pleading validates their delusion that they are in control, that your worth is tethered to their whims. Their ego swells, expanding like a parasite feeding on your dignity. Good people see begging for what it is, an act of despair. But bad people mistake it for worship, for submission, for proof that they hold the reins. They crave such moments because their lives are built on the fragility of dominance, a dominance that exists only in the minds of those who kneel. Evil thrives on begging because it thrives on imbalance. When one person begs, the dynamic shifts, and the one who receives the plea gains a false sense of superiority. They revel in it, bask in the illusion that they are untouchable. Begging gives them a high, a fleeting moment of invincibility that distracts them from the emptiness within. Good people reject this imbalance, understanding that power is fleeting and true, strength lies in equality. Bad people cling to it, feeding their egos until they collapse under their own weight. To beg before the bad is to ignite a cycle of manipulation. Once they taste the power of your desperation, they will crave it again and again. It becomes their drug, their fix, a momentary relief from the mediocrity of their existence. They push harder, demand more, hoping to see you break just a little further. Their egos grow hungrier with each plea, consuming everything in their path. But like all addictions, this one destroys both the user and the used. Begging does not heal relationships. It corrupts them beyond recognition. Good people understand the balance between power and humility. They know that even when someone kneels, the act is not a gift, but a cry for help. Bad people lack this wisdom. They mistake the act for victory, a confirmation of their distorted self-worth. Begging in their presence is like feeding a fire already out of control. It burns hotter, consumes faster, and leaves only ashes in its wake. To beg is to give them the very weapon they will use to strike you down again. The danger of begging is not just in the act, but in its aftermath. When you beg before the wrong person, you embolden their darkness. You reinforce their belief that they are untouchable, that their actions have no consequences. It does not teach them to value you. It teaches them to exploit you. And once they learn this lesson, they will repeat it over and over until there is nothing left of you to take. Begging does not build bridges. It burns them, leaving you stranded and them intoxicated with their false power. Bad people thrive on ego, and begging is the ultimate ego boost. It whispers to them that their actions were justified, that their cruelty was effective. It turns your pain into their triumph, your vulnerability into their weapon. Good people see vulnerability as a chance to connect, to heal. Bad people see it as an opportunity to dominate. Begging is not a bridge to reconciliation. It is a gift to the undeserving, a hand extended to those who will only drag you down. To beg is to surrender your light to those who dwell in shadow. Goodness and evil are not opposites, but choices, paths that each person must navigate. Begging leads you down the darker path, not because it makes you evil, but because it gives evil a foothold in your life. Those who thrive on begging are blind to the harm they cause, blind to the balance of light and shadow that defines humanity. They do not learn from your plea. They revel in it, allowing their egos to overshadow the potential for growth. Goodness is not about being unbreakable. It is about choosing to stand even when broken. Bad people do not understand this. They mistake the act of begging for weakness, when in reality, it is an act of survival, a moment of vulnerability. But vulnerability should never be shown to those who will weaponize it. To beg before someone who cannot comprehend the balance of good and evil is to throw yourself to the wolves. And wolves do not pity, they devour. Beggars market their incapacity. To beg is to make a public display of surrender, to showcase a helplessness that feeds the ego of those who seek control. It is an open admission that power has slipped through your fingers, that your ability to stand alone has been traded for the faint hope of mercy. Those who beg are not just pleading for reprieve. They are selling their inability to survive without the intervention of another. Begging is a currency of desperation, and the cost is far greater than most realize. By begging, one offers a narrative, a story of incapacity, of dependence, of being less than whole. It is a sales pitch that demands pity, a marketing of weakness that strips away pride and leaves only the hollow shell of need. Those who accept this pitch do so with an air of superiority, relishing the imbalance it creates. But in this exchange, the beggar loses far more than they could ever gain. Begging is not a bridge to strength. It is a spotlight on vulnerability, one that invites exploitation. When you beg, you broadcast a message that echoes louder than words. I cannot. This message is a siren song for those who prey on weakness. It tells them you are ripe for manipulation, that your defenses are down, and your spirit is fractured. Begging is not just a cry for help. It is an invitation to the worst kind of people, those who will take your plea and twist it into chains. It markets your incapacity in a way that attracts not allies, but opportunists. In relationships, begging sets a dangerous precedent. It tells the other person that you will lower yourself for their approval, that your self-worth is contingent on their validation. This dynamic feeds their ego while diminishing your own, creating a cycle that becomes harder to break with each repetition. Begging is not an act of connection. It is an act of separation, one that places the beggar beneath the other, stripping the relationship of its balance and respect. The act of begging is a confession, not of guilt, but of dependence. It is a statement that you need something you believe you cannot attain on your own. This confession is music to the ears of those who thrive on control, those who measure their worth by the subjugation of others. Begging fuels their superiority, inflates their already fragile egos, and reinforces their belief that they are the gatekeepers to your happiness. It is a performance they crave because it makes them feel indispensable. Beggars are not just victims of circumstance. They are victims of their own mindset. By marketing their incapacity, they trap themselves in a narrative of failure, one that becomes harder to escape with each plea. The more one begs, the more one believes in their own helplessness, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of dependence. This mindset is the ultimate defeat, a surrender not just to others, but to the idea that you are less than capable, less than enough. The danger of begging lies not just in its impact on others, but in its impact on the self. Every act of pleading chips away at your confidence, your resilience, your ability to stand firm in the face of adversity. It rewires the mind to associate struggle with submission, teaching you to seek salvation outside of yourself rather than within. Begging markets your incapacity to others, but worse, it sells that narrative to yourself, turning you into your own worst enemy. To avoid begging is to reclaim your narrative. It is to refuse to sell your incapacity, to refuse to place your worth in the hands of others. Those who expect you to beg thrive on the idea that you cannot survive without them, but your refusal shatters that illusion. It shows them, and yourself, that you are capable, that you are strong, that you are enough. Begging is not an act of survival. It is an act of surrender. And survival demands defiance, not submission. The people who demand begging are the same ones who would use it against you. They are not interested in your growth or your happiness. They are interested in your weakness, in the power it gives them. To beg before such people is to hand them the keys to your cage, to let them lock you into a narrative of their making. Your refusal to beg is not just a rejection of their control. It is a declaration of your independence, your strength, your unshakable resolve. The power of choice is an intoxicating force, a mantle that few are willing to relinquish. To choose is to wield control, to carve paths and decide destinies. Yet even the proudest chooser finds their grip slipping when circumstances demand begging that wasn't part of their design. When begging is forced, the chooser becomes the very thing they despise, clutching at scraps of dignity, while the illusion of their dominance disintegrates.